Hi everyone, welcome to the Positively Living podcast. I told you in my trailer episode that I would include conversations with people that inspire me. Today is one of those episodes with a very special guest, Sarah Argenal. Sarah is on a mission to eradicate the burnout epidemic that's crushing working parents so they can finally enjoy these precious years of their lives. She is the founder of the Argenal Institute based in Austin, Texas, host of the popular Working Parent Resource podcast, and, most recently, author of the book, The Whole Self Lifestyle for Working Parents, a practical 4-step framework to defeat burnout and escape survival mode for good. Sarah combines 20 years of experience in areas such as psychotherapy, professional coaching, and complex project management to help working parents reclaim their time, energy, and identity in a demanding world. She has been featured in publications such as NBC News, Healthline, Thrive Global, Working Mother, and Psych Central, and is a frequent guest on business and parenting podcasts around the world. You can visit her website, argenalinstitute.com, that's ARGENAL institute.com, to learn more. I've had the honor of being on Sarah's Working Parent Resource podcast multiple times. During our very first conversation, we instantly bonded over topics like simplicity and self-awareness. We're huge fans of Essentialism by Greg McKeown, and like Greg, we believe in using our values to filter what we allow in our lives. In episode 46 of Sarah's podcast, we talked about the deeper purpose of productivity, and in episode 68, she and I went through my simple system for decluttering. I'll link to those episodes in the show notes, but the decluttering one is a great foundation for this episode specifically. Be sure to check it out if you haven't already. Over the years, Sarah and I stayed in touch and continued to collaborate, supporting and celebrating each other, which is how this episode came about. During a recent chat, we discovered that my podcast and her new book were launching around the same time and realized we needed to do something special. In a nod to efficiency and keeping it conversational, we thought recording a chat about both and sharing our philosophies, which align so well, would be a great way to celebrate. And here we are with a crossover episode that she has shared on her podcast in honor of my podcast launch with a different introduction and takeaways. The day this episode goes live, she celebrates the launch of her book, The Whole Self Lifestyle for Working Parents, a practical 4-step framework to defeat burnout and escape survival mode for good. Be sure to head over to the argenalinstitute.com/books so you can grab your copy today. I'm so excited for her. We had so much fun to see where this conversation would go, and I hope you have fun with us. We covered the reasons I began this podcast and how her book came to be and how they overlap. We discussed the overarching philosophy of her book, where she helps us flip the focus and go inside. So often we look outwardly to fix things, what I call the Band-Aid approach. It's hard to accept that there is no quick fix. But when you come to terms with that and do the work, it's a game changer. Sarah reminds us that deep healing cannot come from surface-level tactics. She helps us understand that we cannot educate ourselves into a work-life balance or manage ourselves in any way until we understand ourselves. Personal discovery is the answer, which may sound familiar, as my first episode covers that from a productivity perspective. Her book is an excellent companion to what I coach and an effective resource to help you do the inner work necessary. I want to note that our conversation runs a little longer than what you'll usually find on my podcast, so use this time to listen while you go for a walk, or grab a drink, sit back and relax and intentionally take a longer break with us. Sarah is a wealth of knowledge, and I know you'll appreciate all she has to share. I've had the pleasure of knowing her for quite a few years, and I'm excited to show you why I think the world of her and what she is doing for fellow moms, for all working parents. You're listening to the Positively Living podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zarotny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a coach certified in time and stress management, helping clients make space for what matters most in their lives. Join me each episode and we'll talk about decluttering, stress management, habits, personalized productivity, gratitude, and so much more. I understand the overwhelm of life because I'm a wife, mom to kids and cats, and a former caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it.
Lisa Zarotny, how are you doing?
I am fabulous. How about you, Sarah Argenal, author?
I know, podcaster. This is so fun. So I'm just going to give a quick little recap for those of you who are listening. We are doing a cross episode today for my podcast, which is the Working Parent Resource Podcast. This is one of many episodes, and Lisa is debuting her brand new podcast on the day that this episode releases on mine. Your podcast name is Positively Living.
Yes.
And we're chatting about a couple of different things. So this is going to be super informal. We both are kind of doing a lot of really fun things. And we found out a few weeks ago that they are all coming out into the world at the same time. So we thought we would have kind of this conversation with each other about a lot of the same ideas, and a lot of just in general, a lot of what we do is similar. So we're going to talk about not just the podcast that Lisa is debuting on the first, but also all of the work that she's doing and how it integrates with a lot of the work that I'm doing. The other big reveal for this episode is that I have a book coming out, which I've been talking to you all on my podcast about for a few months now. That's why we just wanted to kind of get together and chat about the podcast and then also my book, and just more even than those two things, the ideas behind both of those things, and how a lot of the work that we both do together is so just supportive of each other, and it really is congruent. And so we thought we'd just kind of have a fun conversation. We don't really have a whole lot of plans for this. We're just kind of jumping in and talking about what we really believe and what, the messages that we're trying to get out into the world. So that's kind of my just real quick intro. Lisa, what did I miss? What would you like to add to that? Where should we go from here?
You missed nothing. This is a celebratory conversation because there's so much going on. And I think the thing that we bonded over so long ago now, I've lost track, but it feels like forever, and yet we have so much that we still want to do. But the thing that we bonded over was this idea of getting beyond the surface level and getting beyond the quick fix. And so these are the topics that we keep wanting to bring up. And I think that we need to be sharing this together because it's like the strength in numbers kind of thing. We want people to hear this. And that's why I wanted you to be my first conversation on the Positively Living podcast. So congratulations first.
Thank you. This is my first interview about the book as well. So this is what I love about our relationship. We met, I don't even know how long ago now, 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. Yeah. And we've been on the same journey, like the same path. We've been kind of at the same level in our businesses. We've been releasing our own things, and they've been different from each other in very specific ways, but also there's so much overlap that when we talk about things, we're like, yes, and yes. And so that's why I'm so excited that you're coming out with a podcast, first of all, because your voice is so soothing and it's just nice to listen to on a surface level. But what you're saying, like so many of these things, we need to have a space and the time to dive deeper. And that's really hard to do, like on a social media post or in an article or something like that. It's so hard to do that there, but on a podcast, you have the time and the space to really like dive into different topics. And I've just always loved our conversations. And so I'm like, oh, and the world gets to have a piece of it. It's so exciting.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I have been inspired, of course, by our conversations. And I've known for so long that that's where the magic happens. How many times have we had a chat and thought, oh, I wish we recorded that?
I know, so many times.
So that's what we're doing today, everybody. But there's something about that, the magic of conversation. And that's not only am I a podcast fan, but And it's such a wonderful way to take in the information and take it in a way that works for us, which is definitely something you mentioned in your book, and we'll get to that. But it's a wonderful way, like you said, to explore and to create that magic that happens when you have an exchange of ideas. And one of my core values is also constantly learning and growing. And you can do that in a podcast. So that was definitely my goal.
Yeah. And I've been podcasting for 3.5, almost, I think it's 3.5 years now. And one of the
Mhm.
things I love about it, even when I do the solo shows, like when I come up with a topic or when somebody suggests a topic to me or something's just like on my heart, it's such a great place to just dive in and explore
Yeah.
and think about all the angles, but then go further and think about like, okay, if I were going to discuss this, how would I do it in a way that makes sense for other people who aren't like in my brain and aren't living the way that I've been living, but I'm seeing this out there. And that to me has been such a fun experience. It's so helpful for me as a human to grow just by doing that alone, whether there's the exchange of conversations, but then you add in other people's perspectives as you're doing that, and it just compounds it. It's so much fun. It's great.
I agree. I'm brand new, but I'm already enjoying it so much.
That actually brought up a question for me. I'm going to dive right in. You have been doing this work for several years, and I'd love for you to just kind of real quick, I know your people have heard your episodes by now, kind of explaining the work that you do, but just real quick for my people, what is the work that you're doing and how did you decide to start a podcast? Like, what was it about this medium, or how did you know that this was the time to start a podcast for you? Like, how did that evolve on your end?
Ooh, good questions. Okay, so just let me see if I can come up with the really, really short version of what happened. I was a caregiver for my mom while I had my two babies. And I had this time in my life, which I do get into in my podcast. And that was, that's a great way to explain something like that. I experienced so much overwhelm and so much stress and chaos that I knew I needed to find a way out to heal. And what I discovered was the power of simplicity. And again, it resonates so much with what you are sharing in your book. It's this idea of really going in instead of going outward. And it was a big life lesson that I learned. And as I started to explore that, I was on that path of essentially what I call decluttering myself inside and out. Exploring the thought leaders, finding a gratitude practice that worked for me, just finding myself again. And then also clearing a path in my life, physically as well as mentally. When I discovered how healing that was for my family, I knew I had to do it for others. And I became a coach. I started as a professional organizer, a very tangible way to do this, and something that I'm still a big fan of, but I knew I had to go into the heart and the head part of it. So that was the path that I took to the coaching side of it. The podcast part was something that has been on my heart forever because I love the medium. I love the conversation. I have a background in recording my voice anyhow, and it's the place that I like the best. And to be honest, I love getting in deep, but still wearing yoga pants.
I know, isn't it great? It's like having your own little radio program. You don't have to go
Exactly.
into a studio.
Exactly. No makeup, but lots of good content.
So much of what you and I both share, and I think you mentioned this just a little bit before, so much of what ails people these days, everybody is so stressed out. And especially now, we're recording this while we're all kind of still in lockdown during the COVID epidemic. Everybody is having a hard time. And so much of what we think will fix it seems to start on the surface. And what I have loved about the work that you're doing, you're like, we need to focus on that because the surface level is important. That is what we're experiencing. That's what we're paying attention to. That is what, we're living our day-to-day lives exposed to. But the underneath stuff is where I think you and I have really connected is like, okay, start there. And that's great. But you got to go deeper. You got to go further. You got to get into those nooks and the freaking crannies, those little hidden corners of your life, both inside and out. Because until you do that part, you struggle with all of the problems that come up in your day-to-day life. And that's what I love about what you do. Again, like professional organizing, and then you do the life coaching for your heart and your soul, stress management, time
Hmm.
management. I mean, you really like run the gamut in terms of the ways that you help people start to get rid of some of that stress and start to live more mindfully and more fully.
Yeah, it's a very holistic approach. And it started with the professional organizing. And as you said, that outer side of it does need to be addressed. That's very important. But getting to the inner is where you're going to make the lasting change. You're going to reduce the reoccurrence of the problems that come up. So it was a transition into the productivity coaching and really redefining productivity. That's huge for me, to say that it's not about doing more, it's about doing less and living more, being more, and exploring that. And then I transitioned into, I received my certification in stress management coaching because I realized it all comes down to stress. And you talk so much about burnout, which I want to get into. And that is a huge, huge part of what we do. So, yeah, I will take a look at the whole life and the whole person, which again, does that sound familiar, anyone? Whole self, right? This is so important. And it's wherever you need to address it at the time, at least in terms of my coaching. Sometimes you look at your calendar and that's the thing that's overwhelming you the most. And we sit down and we work on practical action items that can really work for you, how you work best, understanding that. I want to bring up self-awareness because you talk about self-awareness. And I agree wholeheartedly. I say that self-awareness is your number one productivity tool. And that, this is what we have in common here. But yes, I work on the tangible, and sometimes people will call it like the practical side. I think so much of what you are able to bring is a deep understanding of why these things are the way they are, why we do what we do, what we need to explore. And then I have some of that, but I work with people to say, well, then what can we do next? And how do we implement this and put this into practice? And that's what I absolutely love. Sitting down and completely reworking your schedule or revamping something in your life, or learning finally how to create the boundaries that not only feel authentic, but actually have this amazing result of opening up your life and still serving the people you want to serve. So things like that.
Yeah, I love that distinction too, because that's something that I found over 5 years. I was doing a lot of the like, people are struggling, so let me meet them where they are and help them with that struggle. And so much of what you do is like the professional organizing and the time management, all of that is like the hands-on, the work. And I found over time, I'm like I feel like that's not the right spot for me. It's not the place where it's not my zone of genius, as they call it, I think. And is it the big leap?
Yes.
I found I had to step back a little bit more. And I added at the very kind of at the end of writing my book, I added a parable at the very beginning of the book about a story about the river babies. And I don't know if people have heard this parable or not, but they talk about these villagers who were living by a river. And all of a sudden one day they see a little baby floating in the river, and someone runs in and they, rescue the baby, and they take care of the baby, heal the baby, integrate them into the village and start raising them. And then the next day, another baby, and then another baby. And these villagers are just overwhelmed trying to rescue and heal and then integrate these babies into their village. And one of the guys at some point gets up and walks away. And they say, "What are you doing? We need all the help we can get. We need all the hands we can get here. We're trying to save all these babies." And he's like, "I'm going to go upriver and try and figure out what's going on. Why are all of these babies showing up in our part of the river?" And to me, that has become my spot, is like, I'm going all the way back to the beginning. Like so many of the things that we struggle with, I think we need to go so much further back. And my zone of genius is like, let's figure out what that thing is that's causing you all of that stress. Until we do that, it's, you can try all of these things and it might work and it might not. And what I'm finding with so many working parents who I specifically work with is that they're trying all of these things. They're kind of like the river babies down at the bottom of the river. They're trying all these things and they're exhausted and they're frantic and nothing's working. And I want to walk people up the river and be like, let's really figure out what the problem is here, so we can then go, okay, yes, you need to clear your calendar. You over here, you need to go organize your home. You over here, you have some trauma you need to start working through. It's like, I can point them in the right direction and then point them to people like you, instead of I'm going to try and do all of it. Cause I feel like there is so much going on with so many working parents, and it's really hard to figure out, where do I begin? Where do I start? So I kind of found like that part is my zone of genius. Like that's where I need to focus my energy. And that's really what this book has become, is just like, this is how you can identify in your life what things you need to fix, but I'm not going to help you fix them. Then I'm going to like kind of send you on your journey, send you on your way to people
Right.
like Lisa to actually do that work.
Which I love. So you just answered my question of, and some of it, I feel like, having known you for a while, I sort of know the answer, but I have to make sure I ask it so that everybody knows, what brought you to this book, what inspired it. Was it the content over time? Was it this shift, to figuring out the zone of genius? Was it the book that you wish you could have found? Like what brought it to you?
Oh, all of the above. Yes. It's been an evolution. I started my business 5 years ago now, and it was a very different business then. And even before that, I was certified in marriage and family therapy and adult development. I have my master's degree in psychotherapy. I was a certified professional coach. I'm a certified court mediator. I worked in litigation for 20 years. So I did a lot of project management, and I didn't know what I was going to do with all of that. Through my 20s, I worked in law firms, and then on the side, I would coach people, or I would teach psychology classes at college campuses, and I would write, and I would kind of do all of these things that nourished my soul, but I got my money from somewhere else. And I was fine with that. I really enjoyed all of that. And then I became a working mom, and all hell broke loose, as they say. Just kind of my life turned upside down. And at the time, I'm a researcher. I'm somebody who's like, okay, if there's a problem, we're going to fix it. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to read everything I can get my hands on. I'm going to listen to every podcast episode I can find. I'm going to talk to everybody I know who's a parent. I'm going to find the answers. And everybody gave me such great advice. Everybody, every book had like kind of a little nugget of, something in it that was helpful to me. But I'm like, look, I don't have time to be like digging for all this gold. I need the book. I need one book that's going to walk me through how to do this, because I don't know how to do this right now. I know all the time management tips, but those seem to be for people who are not waking up 4 times a night with a newborn, or I see all of this, parenting advice, but that seems to be for people who are home with their kid all day long and not off at an office and see their kid maybe on the weekends. So I just found like there was this hole of advice or information for me. And so for the first, I'd say 3 to 4 years of my business, I really heavily focused on, let me help you with your marriage, because that's what people are really struggling with. Oh, let me also help you with your time management. Oh, also you need some help with your parenting, so we'll do that. Oh, organization too. There's a lot of problems going on there. And I just kept like adding on all of the problems I was trying to help people with. And at the end of the day, I was kind of like, this is not right. Like I'm not a specialist in all of this stuff. Like I can find 1 or 2, but I'm like, but we're not solving the problem. The problem isn't, I felt again, like I'm down at the bottom of the river. We need to back up a little and help people have a framework or have a formula or have some sort of guide to identify what the problem is before they dive really deep and like spend all of that emotional and mental and time energy into going deeper on that issue. And so that's what I love, first of all, is seeing, kind of like, hey, this is what you're seeing on the top level, but really there's all this like good stuff underneath. And if we can peel away that top level, you're going to get so much more out of the time and energy that you're spending on this problem. Or, many of the people that came to me, they're like, I just need more time. I need more time. Time management, productivity, efficiency. I need more time. And I found that I was like, well, why do you need more time though? Like, what is happening that you need more time? And that answer was always very different for people. So yeah, over the course of several years, it evolved and it evolved. And I always kind of wanted to write a book, but I actually wrote essentially 2 books before this one, and they still sit on my computer. They are not published, and I don't know if I ever will publish them, because they weren't the books that I feel actually need to be out there in the world. They were very redundant. It was very much like, hey, here's how I got through working parenthood. Let me tell you now how you should get through working parenthood using my process. So these were the strategies that I put into place. And so obviously they will help you too. And for me, I was like, that's not true. Like that is what I don't like about so much of the self-help books out there. So that's how this book ultimately evolved. And about a year ago now, I worked with a coach, and within one session working with her, I had totally rebranded my company. I had totally re-envisioned where I'm going with my company. The book, the bones of the book were born from the work that I did with her. And it's also it's the format of my workshop that I do with people and the individual coaching that I do with people. And so the book was already kind of written. It was more just like, okay, how do I put this into a form that people can take with them? And they don't have to do it with me personally. They can just have it as a resource. They can have it as a reference manual almost. That they can start with this. People can always continue on and work with me and go deeper on a lot of that stuff. But I'm like, so much of this stuff is personal work. It's really like we need to shift the focus from out there to inside of ourselves. And how do you do that? That was the question I wanted to answer for people, is how do you kind of get a hold of your life? How do you reclaim that focus and that time and that energy? And I think that all of this stuff like time management and marriage communication skills and all of that stuff is so important. It's so critical. But first, you've got to decide which thing is the thing throwing me off. And that's a different answer for every single person. And the variables and the complexity of everybody's struggles is so different and so unique. I kind of was like, I can't release a book where it's like, this is the prescription for all. This is the way it must be for everyone. And if you do these things, then you will be successful. I just was kind of like, no, none of that's true. And I don't want to release or write a book that claims that. It's just not real.
And that right there is why I'm such a supporter of your book, because I will support people exploring what they want to explore. I am the first one to say, read books, get ideas, be inspired. What I don't want is for them to feel as though they're doing something wrong when they hear someone else say, this is how it should be done. And what I don't want is for them to feel the shame and the guilt and say, what's wrong with me? Why didn't this work for me? Mm-hmm. And that has been a big frustration of mine, right?
Yes. I mean, that was my first, I'd say 3 years of parenthood was, oh, how everybody else is getting this. And I keep reading all these books where they're like, here's what you need to do. If you do this, you're golden. And I would try it and it would fail for me. And I always took that, I always put that on myself as exactly. I failed. So what do I need? I need to do this better. I need to do it more. I need to do it harder. I need to do it faster. Like whatever it is, I'm the problem. It's not that, oh, this worked for that person, but that does not necessarily mean it'll work for me. And that's again, also what I wanted to explore here is like, hey, all of that stuff's out there. This advice can be helpful, but not if you don't have a filter to go through, not if you're not able to start with you, like if you just kind of show up and are like, hey, guru, or hey, expert, or whoever wrote this book, or, offered this piece of advice or whatever, even if it's your best friend or your mom or your sister. I mean, I had so much golden advice, like great advice. And it's been interesting to me now too. Like I don't know if you've had this experience as a mom. It's like, the advice that did not work for me when my babies were 6 months or 1 year or 5 years or whatever, it's like, well, now it's a lot different. As they're getting older, it's like, oh, that's great advice now. And so it's like the context matters, the timing matters, what's going on in my life matter. Like so many different variables contribute to what's going to work for someone and what isn't.
What you have the bandwidth for. For those of you playing at home and cannot see this, I'm like nodding frantically and like waving my arms in agreement. And when you use the word filter, thank you very much, because that's the word I use as well.
Let's talk about your plan real quick. Your simple plan.
Oh, my simple system. Right. And it was the same idea of trying to get to people before everything completely goes off the rails. I love that parable, by the way. That is just, it's incredible. It's like a deep and earnest kind of version of, I always think about the I Love Lucy episode where she's got the chocolates going down the conveyor belt, which is a yes. funny version, but it's definitely a visual for parenthood. And it's very funny, but unfortunately, when it's actually happening to us in real life, not so funny. So I wanted to help. And, when I did the podcast on productivity and decluttering and simplifying, I said, look at Amazon, and it's over 4,000 books if you search clutter or decluttering. The answers, at least according to everyone else, appear to be out there, but if we you really had this set, there wouldn't be that many. So how do we offer something, write something that's different, that makes you think in a different way? And yeah, my simple system, SIMPLE, the second step is identify. And that is where you create the filters. And to me, that I'm immediately sending them to your book, because that is how you dig in and ask the questions you need to ask. Because when you have those answers, everything else falls into place. I'm not saying it's always easy. It's still life, and it still requires, energy and focus and commitment. But when you are sure of what you are doing in the sense of who you are and where you want to be, it's so much easier to make the choices. So that identification, that key part, where are things coming from? Where do you want to be going? When you identify that, you're creating the filters that then allow you to say, okay, I have an opportunity to do something, or someone is asking something of me, or I have this on my list, or I have this in my space. And you can say, does it belong? And you're absolutely right. Does it belong in my life right now? But maybe it does in the future. Maybe when my children are older, it will belong, but it's in that moment. So this is a book that is not only a reference book in terms of picking it up and being able to ask these questions, but also a repeat performer, right? Because when you have different transitions in life, you want to ask the questions again. And when things start to essentially not work and you're like, wait a minute, they were working, that's a sign, right?
Big red flag. Yeah. That's why I called it the whole self lifestyle. The lifestyle piece is key. It's all about a practice that you're creating. This is not a one and done thing. It's not an achievement. This is not something you're going to like check off your list one day and be like, cool, I'm good. I know myself. I know, I have complete clarity about where I'm going in my life. I know how to manage my marriage. I know how to like parent my kids. Because as we all know, like tomorrow, your children are different people. It's like they go through a growth spurt, or, they become teenagers or whatever. And
5 minutes from
everything is
now.
different. Yes. Or you have a hard day at work, or you have a period at work where it's really busy and you feel guilty because you're not focusing on your kids, or vice versa. Like there's so much that changes in our lives day to day. It is a living, breathing thing, our lives. So it is meant to be like, hey, ask yourself these questions. And I have both long form, like, hey, you can take 3 months and dive into this and really get to know yourself and really build a foundation of who you are and get that clarity, and then build on that over time. Or I have like the quick 5-minute check-in every morning that you want to do, or a weekly kind of check-in that you go through, so that you can kind of keep tabs on things and they don't get spiral so out of control. And that's what I mean, over the years now, for me as a mom and then, business owner, all of this stuff, my life has changed so dramatically. And not only that, I have changed so dramatically. It's like choices that I would have made a few years ago are intolerable for me now. Like it's just unacceptable. I wouldn't do certain things, and vice versa. There are things that seem really easy to me now that, a few years ago were impossible. So, it is meant to change along with you. And for me, like I've asked myself these questions over and over again now for many years. And
Yes.
it becomes a part of your moment to moment experience. It becomes a part of, like you were saying, like, I'm stressed. What is it? And you can real quickly kind of take a scan of your life and be like, ah, there it is. That's the thing I'm uncomfortable with right now. Or that's the thing throwing everything else off. Or, oh, that's the thing I need to go address right now in order
Mm.
for everything else not to fall apart. It's like, it's meant for you to start to really like tune in to yourself and your life and your relationships, and go from there, versus everyone else out there is telling me this is what I should be doing. And if I just follow that advice, it should work, but then it doesn't work. And now there's stress involved, and it's even more upsetting because I thought I had the answer and now I'm realizing I don't. Like it's just,
I'm even more confused than when I started. Yeah, that gets into the different types of clutter that I talk about, since my scope here is talking in terms of what's coming in at you, what are you dealing with, and the different types of clutter. One of them is information overload, and
oh
this
yeah.
is what you're addressing in a huge way. It's so important. It is critical for us to tune out the noise. If something comes in and it inspires and it makes us think and it makes us question, it's not that we can't welcome it, but we are in a place in our lives, in the world, where it's exciting that we have so much information at our fingertips, but it's also dangerous.
It's hard to manage. And I
Yes,
think you and I've had this conversation in the past.
for sure.
We are in a place in human development, like human history. It's brand new. We have never had to face this type of challenge as humans, and we don't have the skills. And so that's another part of what I wanted to address in this book is like, how do we develop this skill? Because you're right, like we are so lucky to have access to all of this stuff if we know how to leverage it for our own good. And instead, I think really what we all have been experiencing for the last couple of decades now is just we are being controlled by all of the information. Our lives are out of control because we're just following all of this stuff like bright shiny object syndrome. And when we develop that skill of put it all away and start here inside first, and then work my way out, decide for myself, what do I need? Okay, what are the resources available to me? And target, the search for information. Or for me, like you were saying, like even good information, it's tricky because it's like, that's great advice. How do I apply it? And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You skipped over that question of should I apply it? And is this the right time to apply it? Does this fit in? Again, this is part of the whole part of my whole self lifestyle practice. The whole part is how does it integrate with everything else I've got going on in my life? How is it going to impact everything else I've got going on in my life? So all of those questions are really important and we aren't asking them right now, I don't think.
Yeah, I love one of the things, well, so many things that you said in the book, but one of them is the idea that we can't educate ourselves into work-life balance. And
Which was shocking to me.
you and I are both like, research it, research it. Again, it's not that you don't want to be educated. It's not that you don't want access to the information and to be aware and be inspired, but knowing what to do with it. I call it, I think we're inundated with information. And I love the phrase drinking from a fire hose because it's
Yes.
such a visual for how overwhelmed we can be. And instead, something that you talked about was, getting used to this idea of taking the information when we need it. And to me, I think about the just-in-time knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the more that you know when you've gone through the questions in your book, when you understand where you are, what you need, especially in the now, right now, what's the season of the life that you're in, when you know these things, then you can say, what do I need to focus on? That's, again, good information just came in. That's really interesting, but that's not for me right now.
And I think another piece of this is kind of that scarcity mentality versus abundance mentality, because this information is not going anywhere. I think that it's always going to be available. So good information and bad, it's all going to be out there. And I think what's hard is, well, I just totally lost my train of thought.
Well, it's a scarcity and abundance thing. And it's this idea of that the information will still be there. That is one of the things that I coach in terms of a tactical action kind of item relating to the way in which we schedule and we capture information, that things will come in at us. And a big part of the struggle that we have with overwhelm and time management issues is that we want to take it all in and we want to, let's say, subscribe to that email right now because, oh, this is good stuff and I really want this and I don't want to forget it. And we need to out of sight, out of mind, and all those worries that we have. And I help coach people to find the right way to capture the information and set it in a safe place where they have access to it. We're worried about how we access things, so we keep it all there right in front of us, and then it's complete overwhelm.
I remember my point. So
Great.
and it's directly related to that. It's kind of like how we as humans, again, are processing information. And I mentioned, like, I was raised in the 80s, 90s, like I had a quote analog childhood, I called it. And
Yes.
what you're taught in that kind of life, before social media, before the internet, before all of that stuff, the way that we learned was read a book, hold that knowledge in your mind. You must remember it because, you can't go back to that book every time you want it. Like, we didn't have as much access to information as we do now, obviously. And so the way we were trained to process information was hold on to as much of it as possible, and then often go and take a test and regurgitate it, blah, blah, blah. And now it's just different. It's like this information will be accessible later, whether it's in my head or not. It's like you kind of have to begin to trust that it'll be there when you need it. And that's a hard thing to do if your whole life you were trained, memorize, bring, put it in your brain, don't let go of it. You're always going to need this. You need to recall this later. That stuff's kind of helpful to have in your mind, but the more of that you have, your brain gets overwhelmed, it gets overloaded. And so it's hard to have it be useful for you over time. There's too much of it. And especially now, I mean, the emails that we get and all the social media feeds and all the input, there's 400 times as much of it as there was in the 80s and 90s. We're constantly having to learn how to process so much more information. And the only way I have been able to do that, like you were saying about essentialism, is let it go. It's okay. It's kind of like, I think in the book Essentialism, which I know we both love, by Greg McKeown, he talks about, and this is what I wrote about this in the book. This was a huge pivot for me, where he talks about like surfers, like they sit out there and they wait for that one perfect wave and they really commit to that and they focus on that and they take that ride. And as before that, I was like trying to take every freaking wave. Like I was like, oh, it's coming in, so that means I must pay attention to it. It means I must focus on it. And now I'm kind of like, oh, I can let all those waves go and then choose the ones that are the good ones for me to pay attention to right now. And that really, that was a big shift in my mindset in terms of how am I going to operate my life as a working parent? Because I've got input coming in from all angles, all day, every day, all night. Like it does not stop. I have to be the one to like turn off that fire hose. I need to let it be a little trickle for a while so that I can stop and actually think, stop and actually evaluate things on its face versus, like I'm in survival mode. I'm in, fire drill mode. How do I deal with all this? I'm just going to react and get it done and get out of here. And it was such chaos. I couldn't maintain that for much longer.
Right. And who can? And that is, what we're up against as working parents. There's so much of what we feel is demand on us. And I love that you and I are both questioning, well, what demand really is. And yes, I understand that there's a lot coming from society and that there are a lot of challenges that we face in terms of those expectations. I want to quote you because this is something that is something that I believe in, and I've said, perhaps not as eloquently, but I have said before too, the more we focus on becoming healthy and happy ourselves, the more we model and inspire that behavior for the people around us as well, most of all our children.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's
right there
backwards right now. Don't you? I mean, I feel like so much, even I was listening to a podcast the other day and they were talking about like, it just makes me feel so much better when I'm helping everyone else out there. Like I want to help other people. I don't want to be so selfish. I don't want to be so focused on myself. And yes, of course, it's wonderful to be a good community member or to be a good family member or whatever, be a good friend, be a good employee. All of those things are wonderful things. But what I've noticed is that we aren't working on ourselves inside first. It's like we're doing all of that out there without filling our own cup first. And when you start to do that, that's where resentment comes in. I think, it's like, this is the first book of hopefully many. And that I'm like, if we don't start there, if we don't start inside ourselves and are very clear about who we are and what we have available to give, when we give that stuff, it just leads to resentment and burnout and exhaustion and frustration and all of the things that nobody wants to experience anymore. And so it's so counterintuitive. It really feels like we should be good people, like especially now the world is like, it seems like it's falling apart in so many ways. Shouldn't we be good citizens and be out there helping all these other people out there? But if we are drowning, we don't have anything to give yet. We need to fill that up. We need to, refill that tank, and then we can be truly giving, then we can truly give from abundance and not stress and exhaustion and obligation and all of that stuff that I think so many of us are giving from right now.
Yeah, it's this idea you cannot pour from an empty cup. But beyond that, I want to encourage everyone listening to this. Well, first, before I get into the encouragement, I want to mention something I think you'll appreciate is this idea of how much we elevate the selfless mom.
Yes.
I just want to bring that up, right?
Yes.
And it drives me a little crazy. Just going to put that out there, right? The pedestal of the selfless mom. Are you completely burned out and frazzled and a total hot mess and have given everything you possibly can? Great. When we write your obituary, we are going to,
we'll honor you.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry,
it's
this is
very
a pet peeve.
reinforced. Yeah, and
Yeah, yeah.
I think I was just listening to a podcast episode. Brene Brown has a podcast as well now, which is wonderful. And she was just interviewing Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington about their new show, Little Fires Everywhere, which is a show about motherhood. And it was such a refreshing discussion, but also just the take that these women, they're like, even 5 years ago we couldn't have this conversation about motherhood. And they talked about Carl Jung's quote about the biggest burden we can leave for our children is the unlived life of the mother. And that is so real. And I feel like the message is, it's just inching out there slowly, and I want to broadcast that message to everybody. Like, you giving up your life, or you wasting your years being frustrated or burned out or exhausted or angry or impatient or any of those things, like, that's real time. You're not getting that back. And I really had to try and balance in the book. I'm like, I don't want to pressure people to make the most of every single second, because I think that's a lot of pressure too. And that's also not real. There are hard days, there are tears, there's pain, there's yelling, there's all that stuff. It happens in families and in life and all of that. But on the other side of it is like, well, but what are we striving for? If we just are kind of on autopilot, and if every day we're just kind of making decisions to get through, that's not a life. That's an unlived life. And I have seen so many people, and especially, moms of earlier generations, get to the end and they're like, who am I now? Like, what am I? I don't have my children here to take care of, or I don't have, my husband's off golfing or whatever. Who am I? And I don't think it's necessary to sacrifice all of that, even from the beginning of those years of motherhood, when your little baby is a monkey baby and they need you all the time and you're nursing around the clock or whatever. I still think there's a way to enjoy that adventure, enjoy that process. And I don't think it's a message that's shared nearly enough out there.
Right. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up. And I knew that you'd go with me on this, because I want to encourage the idea that it's not only not necessary to give up our identity, it is imperative that we keep it, in as much as we seek our fulfillment and the way in which we show up as fellow humans. It's not just identifying that we're the mom, but we are someone else. And then it goes back to the quote about modeling for them. And I will tell you also, from a personal standpoint, that I had to struggle to get to this point because my mom didn't model self-care and fulfillment of her own. Now, she may have been, to some extent, fulfilled in what she did. I believe that she believed in what she did. She was incredible. She was giving. Of course, we've elevated her to that point, and I'm incredibly grateful for all that she has done. And I think that she would be proud of what I've done. But at the same time, I have a chance for this next generation to model something even more complex. And when I say complex, what I mean is to add some really wonderful things to it, to take much of what she's done, but then add these other elements of, mom needs her time now, and this is what mom is doing. That's something, a bit different. And this is how I'm showing up for the world, and what I love and what I'm passionate about. And having my children see that, I can already see the effects. They're middle school age, and I can already see the effects. So I just want to encourage that. If you're a mom and you are listening to this and wondering about having your life and your identity and what that will do, it will do wonderful things. I
The
promise you
identity
this.
piece, I think, is also very perplexing sometimes, or interesting. Like, I share in the book as well, I started off really knowing myself as a mom. It's like when I became a
Right.
mom, I knew exactly what I wanted for my career, knew exactly what I loved my marriage. I loved where we lived. I loved everything about my life. We made very conscious choices. I was very self-aware, quote unquote, like I was very clear about all of that. And then I became a mom, and it kind of surprised me when so many of the things that I had wanted, all the things I believed, so many things changed about myself. And I was so overwhelmed, like, you're not sleeping and things are so different. And every aspect of my life was so different. My outlook was changing, all of that stuff. I was in flux, and I didn't know how to evaluate that stuff. And it took me a long time to be like, well, first of all, it's okay that that's changing. It's okay that you were so 100% certain about all these things. And then something came into your life, something happened in your life, and now you're totally not okay with all those things. You don't know anything now again. And I wasn't expecting that. I thought, I had my first baby at 33. I'm like, I'm good. I did my work. I got through my 20s. I did all that exploration. I went to therapy a lot, like I have my master's in this, like all of this stuff. I thought I had done the work. And again, that's where kind of this lifestyle piece comes from is, oh, no. Like you're always evolving. You're always changing. And then when I saw, as my kids have gotten older, it's like, gosh, and then they throw a whole other like wrench into it, a whole other layer of complexity into it. Like, okay, this kid needs this kind of parent right now. That kid needs that kind of parent right now. And so how do I engage with them as individuals and support them and see them? And then also myself with, without sacrificing, like all of that stuff is not easy. It is almost impossible, I think, to do when you're burned out or in survival mode. You just can't see. You're kind of just like, powering through. And so again, that's what I was trying to accomplish is like, how do you answer these questions? How do you even start to look at this stuff? How do you start doing this hard work of forming your identity on the fly, as time evolves? Because it really changes. It's not something you do when it's one and done and you don't have to do it again. You are constantly having to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's important so that we realize that there are going to be times when things shift and change, and to anticipate that and to accept it and welcome it, as opposed to wondering what just happened, and keeping mindful of the time for everybody. One of the things I want to make sure to ask is, how do we encourage everyone, especially those right in the middle of burnout and survival mode, as to what they can do to take the next steps? Of course, one of my recommendations is have the book right next to you to at least go through. Any recommendations on different ways that they could access this information, and first steps that would be, an easy transition into it when you feel so overwhelmed already?
A couple of things. It's so funny because anytime somebody asks me like, what's the one thing everybody can do? And I'm like, oh, no, see, the problem is there's not one thing everyone can do. And there's never a blanket thing.
No, first step is different. It's different than
but
one
again,
thing.
like you
but
were
it's
saying,
the first
everybody's
step.
starting from a different place. Right now is an interesting time too. Again, we're recording this when I think a lot of people are burned out, but for very different reasons than they were burned out 2 months ago or 3 months ago. Like things are changing fast. And I think what you were saying before about like just acknowledging and accepting and being okay with this isn't, this is it doesn't have to be this way. This is not required. This is not a part. It's a bug, not a feature of working parenthood. This is something that can be overcome. And I think that is a really, really hard realization for people or thing to believe, and until they do it, it's going to be hard to believe. So I think just kind of taking that leap of faith and telling yourself, this may not be necessary, like this kind of mental and emotional overload, or feeling like I need to put my kid back in camp if I'm not comfortable with putting them back in camp, or oh, I am done with my kids, I need to put them back in camp. Like kind of knowing for yourself, it just kind of start asking yourself these questions, like touching base with yourself, touching base with your emotions and the thoughts that are going through your mind and how you're feeling kind of moment to moment throughout the day. What are those triggers for you? What are the things that kind of set you off? What are the things that calm you? All of just kind of, it's really just like observing and being in touch with yourself versus looking out there for a next step, an instruction manual, any of that stuff. I really am like, I will like pound the pavement on this one. Like start within. I can't tell you. I don't know. You need, it's like everybody kind of needs to start within. And then, in terms of just a resource, like, my book is available on my website at argenalinstitute.com/books. You can go there, you can get a sample chapter just to check out a little bit of the book. You can pre-order it if you're listening to this before June 15th. The book is published on June 15th, 2020. So anytime after that, you can just go ahead and go to that same link and there'll be a button to order the book. There's also a companion workbook so people can start working through it. And I also have a download that people can go through. So if they just have a few minutes a day, or they want to try something right before bed, or they, want to start journaling, or just kind of start touching back in with themselves. There are just some questions that they can ask themselves. So again, I mean, you don't need anything from me. You can start just observing that stuff from yourself. But if you want some extra help, extra guidance, extra tools, all of that stuff, it's available at argenalinstitute.com/books.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think the first step, and when I say first step, it's simply that sometimes to me, overwhelm is not only having too much to do, but not knowing what to do
But
next.
I think that's the problem.
So
I think we're all looking for, what do I do? What do I do? Where do I go? And we'll try all sorts of things. And if I tell them, okay, no, what you need to do is you need to go, do this thing. You need to go pray. You need to go for a walk. You need to go have a bath. Whatever I say to them right now, they'll be like, cool, that's the thing. I got to go do that thing because that will alleviate the stress. And I'm like, stop. I don't want you to do anything I'm telling you to do. I want you to understand yourself. And that is it's hard. It's hard to kind of just be with yourself in that way, I think. And that's really kind of the point of what I'm trying to do, is help people through the ickiness that comes with just stopping and just seeing ourselves and our lives and going from there, starting from there.
See, that's the step, though, to stop, to decide, and to know that this is the thing. And I love your questions. Yes, to stick with it and remember, this is like becoming a habit. And that's so good, because you go through it and the first time you stumble through it. And then the next time you get better and you get better. And I promise you, it will be like building a muscle and you will get better.
And there'll be some times where you answer those questions and it is like, I don't like these answers. I am really uncomfortable with a lot of these answers. And now I have to change my life or something like that. It's always it's a growth process, and it's messy and it sucks. And a lot of people out there will tell you it's not messy and it's wonderful. And here's the 3 steps till, you're super successful.
And they're so selling you something,
and it
really.
Is so tempting to believe that. And I want to tell people you are perfect the way you are. There are plenty of things you can do just within yourself to start to make a lot of both small and big changes. You're not going to find it out there, but you can use the stuff out there to leverage your growth. And I think that's really all where we can start. I don't think there's anything else out there that's going to be like foolproof. Here you go.
No, yeah, exactly. Decide, believe, and please give yourself grace, because you're awesome.
And then for you, please tell us, where can they find your podcast? What is the first thing, the last thing, the thing right now that you want people to know or to remember or to do or whatever? What would your parting thoughts be?
Okay, the Positively Living Podcast. You can find this podcast on so many different platforms, but if you want to go right to my website, positivelyproductive.com. If you go to my podcast page, that will have all the information you need to find me, to find the show notes, and to listen in to conversations like this one, which has been so incredible. Thank you, Sarah, because ultimately I want to help you do less, live more, and breathe easier.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing this time with me. And I can't wait to be on your podcast. And I'm so glad that you are now on mine for the 3rd time. I will, on my show, at least link all of the things that we've talked about today. I'm sure you will as well. So all of these links will be on the show notes for both of our shows. They'll both be released at at different times, I think, but they will be available on both shows here within the next couple of weeks. So we're good. Thank you so much for chatting with me. This has been such a wonderful conversation, as always.
As always. Thank you, Sarah. The more in touch you are with who you are on a foundational basis, the more you can utilize that deep inner awareness to create a life you love. Sarah Argenal. Thank you for joining me on the Positively Living Podcast. Your time is precious, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you'd like more information on today's show, you can find a link to the show notes on positivelyproductive.com/podcast. If you found value in the show, please click subscribe, and even better, give a quick review on iTunes. It supports me and will help others find the show. If you'd like more positive content, come join me on social media. Positively Productive on Facebook, and positively_Lisa on Instagram. Get ready for kids, cats, and all my quirky humor over there. I look forward to having you join me next episode. Until then, keep it positive and keep making space for what matters most.